Welcome to NCC Unplugged, the podcast from Norwin Christian Church where conversations, community, and culture converge.
What's up, everybody? Welcome once again to another episode of NCC Unplugged. I want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to listen or watch our podcast here at Norwin Christian Church. Yeah. My name is Matt. I am the media director here, and I am joined today by Joshua Persall, our executive minister.
Hello. Thanks for being here.
And Mr. Jeff Terpstra, our preaching minister.
Heyo!
All right. Maybe you should have done the intro so we could have got that out. But so today, Jeff, why don't you share what we're talking about with everyone?
Yeah, so I thought it'd be a good time to discuss some church trends.
Oh, nice.
What I mean by church trends is like attendance of churches nationwide, how Americans are changing, what the demographics are in different generations. Sometimes people ask questions like, well, our church is growing, are others? What is it like out there? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes we just don't get to see a snapshot of what's out there. And so I know for myself, and I'm sure for Joshua as well, we get emails all the time from church leaders or nationwide organizations talking about, hey, this study was done, this is what they see, this is a trend happening. And so that'd be good to open some of those up.
Perfect. Excellent. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah. So obviously, it's undeniable that COVID has a big marker on church attendance. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of organizations are looking at what's happened since COVID. Mm-hmm. Up, down, stayed the same. Mm-hmm. What's going on with people attending the church since COVID. And so kind of I think the big headline is this year, maybe even the end of 2024, but that the decline in nationwide church attendance has stopped.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm.
In other words, lots of people were leaving for various reasons, and the numbers become steady.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Which, I mean, it's kind of something to celebrate, but at the same time, it's like, well, we want the trend to reverse.
Yeah.
Right.
But I guess staying stable is better than a continued decline.
Yeah, absolutely.
Joshua, is that some of what you've been seeing?
Yeah, that's similar to just the info that I get. There has been such a decline in the past 10 years, in the past 20 years, and then as you mentioned, I mean, COVID was just an exacerbator of that, and then it was kind of hard to find numbers for a while with COVID and with churches regathering, and there's a lot of churches are closing, and I was just at a conference earlier this week. And there was somebody there that's more of an expert in that, and I think there's about 100 churches closing every day.
Oh, wow.
But that's not the whole story, because when an individual congregation doesn't last forever, and so there is this I don't know if you call it a natural process, but where churches have a lifespan, but new churches are also starting every day. Now, unfortunately, I don't think we have as many new churches starting as ones are closing, but it's a complex conversation because there are certain churches that, for whatever reason, have become less effective in our current culture, less effective at people going to them, less effective at reaching people. And so obviously those are the ones that are closing. And we don't take any pleasure in that at all. But just to recognize that sometimes there probably is needed this cycle of churches that close because they're no longer effectively engaging with the community. It may be because of the denomination they're part of, because of how they posture themselves on certain practices. It's just not connecting with culture. So I know I opened up several cans of worms, and I'll head those back to you guys.
Something I read was, so around 1990, 90% of Americans identified as Christian.
Okay.
Now, I don't know.
Identified,
yes. Self-identified as Christian. So I don't know what questions they asked or if they just said, hey, do you consider yourself a Christian? 90%. As of 2023, so 2 years ago, that fell down to about 63%.
Okay.
Wow.
And so, there, like you said, that's nuanced. There's a lot of things within that. Of that 90% in 1990, how many were actually living like a Christian? What was that, just a cultural Christian, like, oh, I'm a Christian, but they've really never been to a church, and now maybe because we've defined terms differently, or there's been things like COVID that like have exposed some of this, they wouldn't consider themselves a Christian anymore, or whatever questions were asked kind of disqualified them from being affiliated with that. So Joshua, you're saying earlier before we hit the record button, the largest group that is growing.
Yeah, that group with the data and the statisticians. There's a group called the nuns, and these are people when they do these surveys, they do not identify with any religion. They consider themselves completely non-religious. And so as we look, especially in the last 20 and 30 years, as the church attendance has declined, this group of nuns has risen respectively to the church decline. So we see that people who had been people of faith, families who had been people of faith, are now slipping into that category called none, no religious affiliation.
Yeah. So that's NONE.
NONE.
Not
NUN.
No.
NUN. If you're an NUN, you definitely still have a religious affiliation. It probably would be Catholic. So,
but might be on the decline too. I have no idea.
It probably is. I mean, I think that even in our region, where the Catholic Church has been strong for decades, we've seen so many Catholic churches, due to low attendance, they're combining their parishes together, and so that's been a big thing going on in our locality.
Yeah. So something interesting in the numbers since COVID, since 2020, is there's been an increase in church attendance by millennials and a decrease by boomers. So I went back to make sure I got my years right for those generations. So the baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. So if you're born in those years, you're a boomer. Then Gen X, 1965 to 1979 is in there.
I'm an Xer.
You're an Xer. And then my generation is the millennials from about 1980 to 94.
Me too.
That's an older millennial. Older millennial.
Older than me.
Yeah.
Hey. I'm just saying
It's just numbers. It's fact.
Yeah.
I think we all start with 4 right now, don't we? We all start with 4 here around.
Yeah. So
for now.
So that's interesting, right? Because we think, well, it tends to be, I don't know, the older crowd, those that are trying to hold on to their faith, that are quote unquote better at church attendance. That's a bad word for it, but are continuing their church attendance. When in reality, so millennials, so our kids, middle school, high school, maybe not super young kids, we're starting to become have more church attendance. It says about 39% of millennials report attending church weekly. Okay. So it's more frequent than boomers.
And I can remember prior to COVID, there was a big push to like, in churches, how can we reach millennials? Like they were this like unicorn out there. Like what can we do? Because at one point the numbers for millennials were not that high.
Absolutely.
But I think if you look to broadly categorize everybody as, in the millennial category, they want like a true connection. They want to be able to do something without any gimmicks. They want it to be real,
Authentic.
Yeah, authentic. And I think if I can speak, personally about this church here for a second, I think that's why you see our attendance going up, and it's starting to skew a little bit younger as well, and starting to skew into the millennial age range, because we don't have the gimmicks here. Like we have great worship, preach the word, and have a great church family. So I just remember being in meetings before, like, what can we do to reach the millennials?
Another interesting part of this, so non-white millennials are attending church at a much higher rate than, I shouldn't say much.
Okay.
I think it's 45% as opposed to 35%. So 45% of non-white millennials are attending church weekly in America, compared to 35% of white millennials.
And I may have missed it. You said this is for America? Just
So this is a Barna report.
All right.
So there's no maybe why behind that. A lot of times the statistics doesn't give the why, but just something interesting that's part of it. Some might, boomer generation might have struggled with technology, but statistics say they aren't going to church at all, whether it be online or in person. And so they've dropped out completely from a church experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see that shift for the boomers, because they have been and still are in so many places very foundational to the congregations. And there's some congregations that are struggling to reach the new generation, and some of those, churches are eventually closing, but there's some who still, definitely have the doors open because the boomers are there, they're financing it, they're showing up.
And leading in leadership positions.
Yeah, absolutely. They're holding the leadership positions. And so it is an interesting shift. And I wonder, for the boomers being the older crowd, I wonder if COVID was such a huge change for them. And some of them have, health concerns that younger people don't have. And I think, I bet you that COVID probably impacted that group more than others about how they continue to interact with church going forward.
Yeah. Another part of this is the type of church you are. So non-denominational churches are, they say, gaining momentum and growing at a much higher rate than denominational churches. We've, at Norwin Christian Church, always been a non-denominational church. We believe that as a biblical model, not just a practical model. There's been, I think, just from my own perspective, really, there's been a trend that, because church denominations are seeing this, they're changing names, and some, because of their growth, almost outgrow their denomination and become a non-denominational church. So I don't know how much of that is playing into the numbers. I think, again, just personal observation, a lot of it is a hesitancy towards structure and I don't know if domination, but structure, and
I think people are hesitant about the institutions.
Institution,
yes,
people is the word I'm looking for.
Because, and especially, I think COVID once again exacerbated that. It's like, do we believe the government? Do we believe what they're saying about the virus, about masks, or whatever the conversation would have been? And so I think at every level, people are suspicious of institutions, and so the church is an institution of our culture. Now, we know it's more than that, but people see it as an institution of our culture. And so when you've got a denominational label on it, if it says Baptist, Catholic, or Anglican, or Presbyterian, it makes it feel more institutional. And so, Jeff, like, if you're planting a new church, somebody might plant a new Presbyterian church, but they might not use Presbyterian in the name of it because they don't want any negative baggage to go along with it. So.
So this report says 6.5 million more people are attending a non-denominational church in the 2020s than in 2010. So there's just a rise in non-denominational. And this point was put out by Kerry Newhoff. He says he attributes this to church plants. Church plants, like you said, tend to be non-denominational. Non-denominational churches actually, because of the way they're organized, because they don't have a hierarchy, they're still organized through parachurch organizations. Those parachurch organizations are really healthy at supporting churches and getting churches healthy. And so because that happens a lot in the non-denominational world, he lists a few different organizations that people work through. They're providing robust training, equipping, than traditional denominations do. And so if you're, and I have nothing against the Lutherans or anything, but if you're a Lutheran, you would look to the Lutheran denomination to help you. And that would really be it. Whereas non-denominational, we take our pick of, okay, well, who's doing the best work when it comes to this space or when it comes to this? And those rise to the top and become more robust than maybe some in the denomination. And so that's part of what he attributes that to.
I feel like what we're seeing here is adaptation. In that churches that are non-denominational or non-denominational tribes of churches are just, they're able to respond quicker, where the denominations that have such deeper histories are more entrenched in their ways, and they're not able to shift as quick to meet culture where they're at. I think non-denominational organizations and churches are more, they're just able to adapt quicker and meet culture where they're at.
Yeah. So to give anybody context to who we are as a church, like we've been saying, we're a non-denominational church. We come out of a movement called the Restoration Movement. happened. Some of what right where we are in southwestern Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, where people said, hey, we need to restore this New Testament model of Christianity. And so we look to the New Testament for our guidance in our governance, in our beliefs, in the way we go about, and our methods of doing things. And so that's why we are non-denominational. We see that as the model in the New Testament. Another trend that we've talked about in-house and how that plays out in our church is that people tend to be, those that call themselves Christians, attending church less frequently.
Yes.
And so whereas we may have had a church years ago of 700 because half our church attends half the time or whatever it would work out. I don't think half, but, we're a church of 600. Whereas if people came more frequently, Joshua, do you know the exact number of where people are in their frequency? An average churchgoer goes 2 times a month.
I think it's between. I think it's like 1.8 if I remember. Was
1.8 times a month.
That's like for average is like 1.7, 1.8.
Okay.
Yeah. Where in times past it may have been closer to 3 times a month would have been the average, or something between 2 and 3.
Does that include online attendance? Do you know?
I don't think so. I think that may be more of an in-person data points.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people around here are so appreciative of having online service, so they know they're not missing out on something. They can still get the news. And so the reason we've talked about that in-house is because why do we have all these people telling us they don't know something's coming up? Like we talked about it. We had an announcement on stage about it. We have flyers in the chairs. What do you mean you don't know about it? Well, if we did it once or we did it twice, that means a lot of people missed it. People that still call this their church home and want to be a part of things. And so that plays into some of how we do things or how we might go about.
I think that's an interesting correlation too with the decline of the more institutionalized churches that have been around for a while, the decline of that attendance, and with that group of people, being at every service, anytime the doors are open, you're there. With now kind of the rise of the non-denominational church, not that it's less important, but it's just how people are now versus back then in the more old school concrete churches back then.
Something I think we'd love to speak into is that we recognize there are people out there seeking after Jesus and following Jesus, but they are hesitant about church. They're hesitant about church, and we want to reach them with a message, and our message is we love the fact that you're following Jesus. We love the fact that you're okay kind of being independent in that, but you're missing out on part of what God intended. And we're not trying to strong arm you back into the church and saying, oh, you've got to go to church or your eternal security is in jeopardy. We want to have a conversation because we recognize there's been problems with church, and that's what's led to some of the attendance decline. People have lost trust in church. But we want to redeem that, and we want to see through Scripture, this is what God intended. We were not created to do our walk with God alone. So that's just a message I think we want to share, because we know there's a group of people out there. They love Jesus, they want to follow Jesus, but they have some hesitation about what church looks like in their perception.
Yeah, I mean, church hurt is legitimate. Lots of stuff. The church is not perfect. The people that make up the church are not perfect. Ministers are not perfect.
Correct.
But we, like you said, we want to have a conversation. We want to see how we can help with that. We've talked in the past about how we're trying to be an oasis for people that are just tired and weary and disappointed and frustrated and at the world or even at the church, to be a place where people can come to get some refuge and some help. So talking about NCC specifically, we are a growing church right now. We're in a very healthy place. God has blessed us, and we've been walking in His blessing. And what I mean by that is we are trying to figure out where God is going and catch up a little bit.
Yeah.
We're not trying to step out in places where God isn't currently. and saying, "Come on, God, let's get over here." We're really trying to like. So that sounds like a walk in God's blessing, but I just mean like God is going somewhere, and we're trying to figure that out through wisdom and discernment.
And we're trying not to use human methods to advance our church.
Right.
We're really just trying to sense how God would gently lead us along.
Yeah. One thing that helped us in that is our Thursday evening service. We started that in 2024 in the fall. Lots of people responded, people that work over the weekend, people that are immunocompromised, people that it's hard to get up that early because they're on medicine or just whatever stage of life they're in. And so an evening service works better, weekday. So Thursdays is part of that. We have a thriving children's ministry and youth group where we're caring for our kids and our students. We believe they're part of the church already, not just preparing them for something that God's going to have them do in the future, but God's working in them now. And so we want to build into them. We're caring for our community and very legitimate needs. We're showing up for people when they have those needs. And so it's funny because a church, like you said, about 100 churches die a year. It's like 1% to 2% of churches in America die every year.
100 a day, actually.
100 a day.
Yeah, 100 a day. It's crazy to think about. Yeah.
Some people in those churches may say the exact same thing we say, but in a very much different way. So they will say, well, people just don't want to hear the truth anymore. Mm-hmm. And what we say in our church is, people do want to hear the church. They're so hungry. They're showing up from everywhere. Yeah. So we say the same thing, but in very different ways of like that people do want the truth. And so we've just seen that over and over again, and people are hungry. They're diving in. They're getting into small groups. Like a month after they start coming to the church, they're getting in people's lives. They're serving in some area. And so that's why I'm saying like God is doing this through them. And we're just like, okay, how do we start this ministry for them? What do we do with this group? How do we get that and this and that? And there's some ceilings we're bonking our heads on as far as our facilities and time, but we're continuing to try to be open to say, okay, we don't want any barrier to come between God and His people, and so we want to continue to grow in whatever that might look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And two, I mean, a lot of us may have friends that are in churches that are experiencing a decline. It may be getting very small, maybe in danger of closing the doors. And we want to be very compassionate with that too, because, those we all have the same mission. We want to know Jesus. We want others to know Jesus. And it's not that we're better than anyone else. It's we're all in this together, and we want to come alongside of those folks as well.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else, Matt?
I'm just thinking about kind of the technological side of things, and having people not want to step foot through the doors of a church, maybe due to church hurt or some other reasons and everything. But now, and my mind's just locked on the boomers are declining and the millennials are rising in church. I'm wondering, looking into that more, if it is because we now have an access point where you can attend church and get to know a church before ever stepping foot through the doors of a church building. And I'm wondering if, the boomers or older generation may be more hesitant to check out those means or routes of getting to know a church. Yeah. 'Cause like you were saying, a church that may be dying or dwindling, I've seen some that have the thought, well, if they're not coming to us, they're the problem. Like if they're not stepping, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, but they're not showing up, so they're in the wrong. Where thankfully here at Norwin, we're like, here's all these access points for you to check us out.
Right.
And in my mind, the end goal through our live stream is to have people then come and join us in person and plug in and be a part of a small group and everything. So it's interesting to look at these statistics and kind of think about the why behind all of them and what's really going on. So
yeah. And at the end of the day, we know these are statistics, but each statistic represents a person.
Exactly.
And so that's why we're passionate about it. That's why we watch it. That's why we're like, not to discount any generation. We want all generations to come. And so how do we continue to build into our group that we call the Vintage Voyagers? How can we have better access in the building for them, or how can we reach them, or how do we can go to bring our mobile food pantry to a different location that reaches a different generation, or whatever it might be, because each of those numbers represents a soul.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and just realizing, tagging on to what Matt was saying, is that our newer generations are going to be more hesitant to walk in the building, and we're super thankful right now that we have lots of new people walking into our building, but there are so many more that we need to reach and that we want to reach. And so remember that's our opportunity wherever we're at in our space, in our culture and in our society and out there with people. Let's not let it just be the people who are walking in the building. We want to go to them.
You have to do the outro.
Oh, man. All right. I thought I was just responsible for the intro. Well, I want to thank you all once again for joining us as we kind of took a deep dive on church metrics, and very important too, what Jeff just said. Like, each of these numbers that we look at, it represents a person, it represents a soul and their eternity. So just ask that you would continue to watch along, follow us, and be in prayer for those people that may be on the outside looking in, and that we could reach them and bring them to know Jesus. So once again, thank you for joining us on NCC Unplugged. Until the next time, have a great day. Yeah, I don't do outros that well. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to NCC Unplugged. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please be sure to rate and review it and share it with your friends and family. If you are interested in learning more about Norwin Christian Church, visit our website at norwinchristianchurch.com. We also invite you to join us at NCC for one of our 3 services. Sundays at 8:45 and 10:30 a.m. and Thursdays at 7 p.m. We have engaging classes for all ages, ensuring there is something meaningful for everyone in our church community. Thanks once again for listening, and we hope you have a great week.